Before we begin, I want to give a caveat about this class based on what I've learned from Edinger, okay? Because what Edward Edinger is or was a remarkable man. His spirit is obviously here at this table tonight, but he died in 1998, and he studied with Esther Harding, and with Esther Harding, he founded the Jung Foundation in New York City. That's how into the center of this he was. And then in his later life, he moved to LA. Now, one of the things about Jung's writing is you can read all this whole oeuvre, and I've been doing it my whole life, or not my whole life, but the last 30 years. And you can just be lost in it. Okay, and so in these two audio presentations that he made, he just cut through, and he said, okay, there's this quote from this book, and this quote from this book, and this quote from this book, and these are the important ones that say this about individuation and about the greater personality, right? And you know, it made so many traps close in my mind that things that, you know, okay, I know it was important. I was sort of lost in the space of the 20 volumes, and you know, he just pulled it all together for me. And that's why I think these two audios, or these two talks that he gave, are just remarkable. I'm hoping I can find some of the other ones as well. But one of the things that he said sobered me, so I want to sober all of you, okay? Which is that, well, first of all, something I never understood, which is that the objective of analysis, if you go to a Jungian analyst, the objective of analysis is to give you this religious experience. Okay, I never understood that that was the primary objective of Jungian analysis. And he said, you know, it can be very good or it can be very dangerous, all right? And what he said was that he felt it was important to talk about it because if you have one of these religious experiences, these experiences with the collective, then you're more prepared for it if you know something about Jungian psychology. And he said, you know, a lot of times it doesn't happen when you're in analysis. It can happen years after analysis, and it can also happen with no analysis. That's how it happened with me. I do have these experiences very frequently. I had one right here last week on camera. I can talk about. But last week we were talking about the Jackson Pollock and the fact that I couldn't figure out why I burst into tears when I saw that painting. And, you know, I never had pulled it together. And very simply, in a couple minutes, Bill said, I'll bet that has something to do with some experience in Vietnam. And boom, he just got it. Okay, that was it. That was it. I mean, I'm not saying that's the only thing, but that definitely explains why that event occurred. I'm just complimenting you because
I think exactly.
because of this religious.
You've had a religious experience.
I had a religious experience on camera here last week.
Really?
Prompted by you.
Because of you. That's right, green. It was the Jackson Pollock. And the way you can tell is because, you know, you saw me get very emotional when you said that, and immediately, you know, it was something that I couldn't explain for 20 years, and, you know, it's sort of like analysis, and you just said something that just, oh my God, that's it. And, you know, when I started to tear up and get emotional about it, then I knew that you'd definitely touched a complex there, and that's probably why? I mean, that's good. It's good. It's definitely good, and it's definitely good that we got it on video because that's what we're talking about here. So I'm in the process of giving a caveat emptor here, okay, because as he said, a connection to the collective unconscious can be great, but it can also be very dangerous. First of all, he says it's the objective of analysis, right? And to give you a religious experience. And now that I think about it, this is what he said to Bill Wilson about Alcoholics Anonymous. It was the basis of founding Alcoholics Anonymous, which was you have to have a religious experience. But I never understood that. I said to myself, why do they cram Christianity down the throat of these people? And I don't think they do necessarily, but one of the 12 steps is a connection to the God image, right? And I never understood that because I've never been in analysis or in AA, and I never really knew why, but now I get it. Okay, now I've grokked it. And so Edinger said, not only is it the objective of analysis, but oftentimes it doesn't happen until 2 or 3 years after analysis. It's cooking down in your unconscious, and then all of a sudden, bango, it happens. And, okay, if you've been to analysis, chances are you're going to be ready for it and know what's going on. But he says a lot of people have it without going to analysis. And that was my experience. That was my experience with my novel, exactly. Now, I hadn't been to analysis, but I had been reading a lot of Jung, and I had read immediately before this experience Estes' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, right? And so from that, I took the 9 steps of women's individuation in that one story, Vasalisa the Wise. And so I was in the process of putting that template into my novel, and I was doing it in a very pedantic way. And then all of a sudden, that's when my experience began, which lasted 8 months, okay, and which wrote the novel really for me. And so, and I never understood that that's what the psychogenesis was until I listened to these talks. I mean, I understood I was dealing with archetypes, and fortunately, like having had analysis, if you know something about Jungian archetypes, then you're better prepared to deal with these situations. But I often have these experiences. As I said, we did one last week, but I didn't really understand that by having this class and discussing these issues, and being present and thinking about these issues only two hours a week, that this may happen to any of you, very honestly. Okay? Whether you've read the stuff or not, if you listen to this conversation, it's possible that this can generate a religious experience or an experience with the unconscious, a confrontation with the unconscious. And so I said right at the beginning of this class that I'm not an analyst and I'm not going to do psychotherapy in this group, but I have to acknowledge that there is a possibility that I may have already kicked off in everybody's psyche after 24 video classes, that I may have kicked off some stuff that you need to be aware that it can happen. And
sorry, just like we could get adjoining rooms and work silent, we can keep up a little more time.
Yeah, right. And and Edinger's talking about how Nietzsche didn't integrate it when he was doing his main body of writing. He was just lost. He just was lost in his unconscious. I mean, if you ever listen to the audio, not only of Zarathustra, which he mentions in that one audio, but also in Beyond Good and Evil, oh my God, that's That's an unbelievable book, because it's like one run-on sentence. You move through the centuries back and forth, and it just goes whoa, 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 whoa. And I know when I listened to that, I said, "Oh my God, this guy was brilliant." But what he had done was he had plugged into the collective unconscious, and he lost his sanity. Okay, and so he went insane, and he went to the insane asylum. But Edinger says that he did integrate it while he was in the asylum, and so he said that made him sort of like the father of depth psychology, but it cut him off from being a philosopher. Right. Okay, so the caveat is everybody who continues to come here, we have to have an understanding that if you do start to have a psychogenic experience, number one, what Jung did as a psychiatrist was he kept coming out of it and reminding himself that, I'm a psychiatrist, I have patients, I live at 228 Seestrasse in Kusnacht, I have 5 children, I have a wife, and those things contained him as a psychiatrist at that time. And in my case, I was contained because I was doing it from like 6 to 8 in the morning, and then my wife would need me, so I would be brought back into everyday life by that, out of this, plugging into the unconscious type of thing. That's a quick and dirty way to handle it, but best way to handle it are to do creative arts, to try to nail it down and integrate it into your life so that you know what you're doing. And the other thing, if it starts to get really serious, is you do need to see a professional. Okay, and I'm not it. I can talk to you about it in terms of, yeah, I think you need to see a professional. But I just need for everybody to be aware that that's a possibility.
I found that you can get into kind of a quandary sometimes when they just trying to interpret a dream.
Well,
There's
that's
something you can't figure out,
yeah.
symbol or something. Like I have this one dream that it started out with these guys mowing this lawn down on this pool down below, and I'm in a park, and I'm up on sort of a hill, and they had mowing machines, and just lawnmowers, and they got more and more malevolent. It was like they had these long coats on, like spooky people. And then the lawnmower started sounding like machine guns. Okay, and I'm like heading up the hill, and I'm trying to figure out what did that symbolize, And it's disturbing.
Well, and
to try to figure out what.
Yeah, don't ask me. I'm not going to tell you, but
that's just an example. That's just an example.
Right.
Because dreams are very ethereal, kind of spooky things.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but you're talking, it's a different thing.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, what does it mean?
See, when I was in my early 20s, I was trying to get over the edge all the time. And I had certain ways, and it's interesting to hear that Jung had these things he would say to himself, because I did too, to say, okay, square root of 1 is 1.4, square root of 2 is 1.414, square root of 3 is 1.73. And I do these little routines, and I go, okay, I haven't lost it.
So you would try to push the edge? And then
Well, I
have
was
way
in
to
the
pull yourself
arts.
back.
I was always in the arts. And so most people in the arts fall off the edge.
Yeah.
But I was young and I wasn't worried.
Yeah, it's possible to fall off the edge, and certainly the stories of artists who lost it and died young are very common.
27 seems to be a big year for an artist.
27.
Yeah, well, there's Jim Morrison, what's her name?
Janis Joplin. Yeah.
There's, I think, I could go on. I can't think of all the names
Yeah.
right now, but there were at least half a dozen.
Right.
But yes, it is tinkering with the things under the hood. Isn't it?
Yeah, but one thing I would say though is I talked about doing tandem active imaginations and how I haven't wanted to do one by myself like he did. Okay, that's what the whole 5 years of the collective of his confrontation was all active imagination. Now I think I could do it. Now I understand it better, but only because of these Edinger talks. Because what he's done is just sliced through it and plugged it all together for me in one big go.